All right. Now, in the 1890s, what type of work did Negroes in Philadelphia do? What type of options did they have to move in between different jobs? Were all the jobs available to them? And if not, why not? This and much more is what we're going to answer as we continue our study from the 1899 book, The Philadelphia Negro by Dr. Du Bois. So let's find out how they made a living. But when the question is complicated by the fact that the group has a low degree of efficiency on account of previous training, is in competition with well-trained, eager, and often ruthless competitors, is more or less handicapped by a somewhat indefinite but existent and wide-reaching discrimination, and, finally, is seeking not merely to maintain a standard of living, but steadily to raise it to a higher plane, such a situation presents baffling problems to the sociologist and philanthropist. So we have a group that has a low degree of efficiency, meaning they're not very skilled and not very productive due to many centuries of being conditioned to be slaves, who is competing against other groups who are well-trained and often ruthlessly competitive, meaning aggressive in finding work and willing to go above and beyond to get it. This is who the blacks were up against. On top of that, blacks had to deal with discrimination from the whites and foreign immigrants, who did their best to keep them at the bottom, right? He says finally that blacks were not just trying to survive, but they were trying to rise to better positions in life, right? This is what's going on at the time. So again, blacks were inefficient due to slavery, competing against people who were efficient and ruthlessly competitive. They were in a society that discriminated against them while they were trying to rise above mere survival, right? This was a baffling problem to the sociologist and philanthropist. And yet this is the situation of the Negro in Philadelphia. He is trying to better his condition, is seeking to rise. For this end, his first need is work of a character to engage his best talents, and remunerative enough for him to support a home and train up his children well. Negroes were trying to climb to the mountaintop and were not just looking for handouts, but they first needed access to the proper jobs so they could show what they were capable of. Not just the lower level work, but more advanced jobs as well to display their talents, and jobs that also pay enough to support their family. That's what he says they were looking for. The competition in a large city is fierce, and it is difficult for any poor people to succeed. The Negro, however, has two especial difficulties. His training as a slave and freedman has not been such as make the average of the race as efficient and reliable workmen as the average Native American, or as many foreign immigrants. The training under slavery prepared their mind and actions for the slave world, and the training after slavery wasn't much to overturn their old conditionings and prepare them for life after slavery. As a result, the average Negro in Philadelphia was not as efficient or as reliable a workman as the average Native American, meaning white American, or as many of the foreign immigrants who were often fiercely competitive. Now, there were exceptions to this for sure, but he's talking about on average as a whole. The Negro is, as a rule, willing, honest, and good-natured, but he is also, as a rule, careless, unreliable, and unsteady. This is without doubt to be expected in a people who for generations have been trained to shirk work, but an historical excuse counts for little in the whirl and battle of breadwinning. Other people didn't care about what Negroes had gone through and how they had been mentally destroyed and culturally set backwards. Of course, it was a valid excuse, but this is the job market and survival we're talking about, and in that world, none of that mattered. Of course, there are large exceptions to this average rule, reliable as any class of workmen, and who in untrammeled competition would soon rise high in the economic scale, and thus by the law of survival of the fittest we should soon have left at the bottom those inefficient and lazy drones who did not deserve a better fate. The exceptions are referring to Negroes who were just as capable and as competitive as anyone else. He says if they were not discriminated against and if competition were truly fair, then these talented individuals would rise quickly in the economic system. And the lazy Negroes who really did not want to do much would be left at the bottom of the pit because they really don't deserve a better fate. right? This was in the ideal world where competition was equal and open to everyone across the board. However, in the realm of social phenomena, the law of survival is greatly modified by human choice, wish, whim, and prejudice. In the real world, humans were shaping the outcomes based on factors other than merit and qualifications. So if Negroes were the most qualified, the prejudice coming from the whites would often block them off from succeeding. And consequently, one never knows when one sees a social outcast how far this failure to survive is due to the deficiencies of the individual and how far to the accidents or injustice of his environment. This is especially the case with the Negro. Everyone knows that in a city like Philadelphia, a Negro does not have the same chance to exercise his ability or secure work according to his talents as a white man. Just how far this is so, we shall discuss later. Now, it is sufficient to say in general that the sorts of work open to Negroes are not only restricted by their own lack of training, but also by discrimination against them on account of their race, that their economic rise is not only hindered by their present poverty, but also by a widespread inclination to shut against them many doors of advancement open to the talented and efficient of other races. This was a major function behind the white supremacy ideology. It was to get people to identify with this concept of race, so they could lump people together and have an easily identifiable marker on who should and should not be discriminated against. And this has always been how this idea has been weaponized, because when you think about it, what other purpose has race really served? What has identifying as a white person ever been about other than going around the world and dominating people? That's what whiteness is about in this concept of race. And what has identifying as black or Negroes historically been about? The people who are to be dominated and discriminated against. That's why Europeans and white Americans set up the game and got other people to play that. And now again, Dr. Du Bois is telling us that Negroes were not only being hindered by their own lack of training, but they were being discriminated against based on their race. You see? And the doors of opportunity were open to other groups based on their race. Think about that. Now from here, let's take a look at this chart that shows the occupations of the whole population of Philadelphia compared to the Negroes in the 7th Ward. Look how the chart is basically the opposite for the two. We can see right here that domestic and personal service is where most of the Negroes worked, compared to this being the smallest sector for the rest of the population as a whole. Then for trade and transportation, it decreases, and manufacturing and mechanical industries is the least, whereas on the other side, it actually increased for them. So blacks largely occupied the low skill and low paying jobs, while everyone else was mostly in the high paying, high skill jobs at the time. Right? Part of this was due to blacks not having the skills, but another part of it was due strictly to their race. The general causes of poverty are largely historical and well known. To appreciate the cause of low wages, we have only to see the few occupations to which the Negroes are practically limited and imagine the competition that must ensue. That's competition amongst themselves and against unskilled workers from the other groups. This is true among the men and especially true among the women, where the limitation is greatest. All the forces that are impelling white women to become breadwinners are emphasized in the case of Negro women. Their chances of marriage are decreased by the low wages of the men and the large excess of their own sex in the great cities. They must work, and if there are few chances open, they must suffer from competition in wages. It was wild for them, wasn't it? Among the men, low wages means either enforced celibacy or irregular and often dissipated lives, or homes where the wife and mother must also be a breadwinner. Statistics curiously illustrate this. 16.3% of the native white women of native parents and of all ages in Philadelphia are breadwinners. Their occupations are restricted, and there is great competition. Yet among Negro women, where the restriction in occupation reaches its greatest limit, nevertheless 43% are breadwinners and their wages are at the lowest point in all cases save in some lines of domestic service, where custom holds them at certain figures. Even here, however, the tendency is downward. This was the struggle, and it must have been extremely stressful for both the men and the women. The learned professions are represented among Negroes by clergymen, teachers, physicians, lawyers, and dentists, in the order named. This is now discussing the Negro professions throughout the city of Philadelphia, and not just in the 7th Ward. Practically all Negroes go to their own churches, where they have, save in a very few cases, clergymen of their own race. There are not less than 60 Negro ministers in the city, possibly 100, mostly Methodists and Baptists, with 3 or 4 Presbyterians and 2 Episcopalians. We already know that wherever Negroes go, plenty of churches follow. That's part of their culture. They picked up these denominations during slavery and have clung on to them ever so tightly. So we should not be surprised if there were possibly 100 ministers in the city at that time. If there was one profession Negroes could not be blocked off from, it was this one. Taken on the average, the Negro ministers of the city are good representatives of the masses of the Negroes. They are largely chosen by the masses, must cater to their tastes, and must in every way be men whom the rank and file of the race like and understand. The ministers weren't chosen because of their high degree of knowledge. The people had to like them as a person, and they had to tell the people what the people already wanted to hear. Sometimes a strong personality, like the late Theodore Miller, will take a church and lift it to a high level, meaning raising the standards and morals of the people. This would happen sometimes, according to Dr. Du Bois. Usually the minister rather follows than leads, and indicates public opinion among his people rather than forms it. But usually the ministers just tell people what they already wanted to hear. They weren't selecting the ministers to come in with some transformative doctrine. His job was to reinforce public opinion. The Baptist minister is the elected chairman of a pure democracy, who, if he can command a large enough following, becomes a virtual dictator. He could have all the power and call all the shots if he could get a big enough following. He thus has the chance to be a wise leader or a demagogue. He could use the church as a tool to lead the people to a high level, or he could use it for his own personal gain, or, as in many cases, a little of both. The Methodist minister is the appointed steward of a large corporation, of which his particular church is a small part. His success depends upon the way in which he conducts this church, his financial success, his efforts to increase church membership, and his personal popularity. The result is that the colored Methodist minister is generally a wide-awake businessman, with something of the politician in his makeup, who is sometimes an inspiring and valuable leader of men. In other cases, he may develop into a loud but wily talker, who induces the mass of Negroes to put into fine church edifices money which ought to go to charity or business enterprise. It just depends on how the leaders chose to use their position. They could be valuable leaders of the people and use the church to do so, or they could be slick-talking pastors who get the people to give money to make the church look good, which could have otherwise been used for charity and building businesses. Right? So this here was a little bit of the background on the Negro minister occupation. After the ministers, we have the teachers, and there were about 40 of them in the city. These teachers are in nearly every case well equipped and have made good records. Save in the kindergartens or in one or more temporary cases, they teach Negro children exclusively. The public school teachers receive the same pay as the white teachers. So he credits the Negro teachers as being well equipped and qualified for their position, which is very good since they were able to use their talents primarily for teaching the Negro children and get paid what they were supposed to be paid, right? So that's the scope on the teachers. Next, we have the physicians. The Negro physician is today just beginning to reap the reward of a long series of attempts and failures. At first thought it would seem natural for Negroes to patronize Negro merchants, lawyers, and physicians from a sense of pride and as a protest against race feeling among whites. When, however, we come to think further, we can see many hindrances. If a child is sick, the father wants a good physician. He knows plenty of good white physicians. He knows nothing of the skill of the black doctor, for the black doctor has had no opportunity to exercise his skill. Consequently, for many years, the colored physician had to sit idly by and see the 40,000 Negroes healed principally by white practitioners. Today, this has largely changed, and principally through the efforts of the younger class of doctors who have spared no pains to equip themselves at the best schools of the country. The result is that fully half the Negroes employ Negro physicians, and to a small extent these physicians practice among the whites. So Negro doctors were on their way up, and finally gaining some experience and recognition amongst their people. The youth went to the best schools and received proper training. This is what helped earn the respect and trust of the community. So the Negro doctors were on their way up and finally gaining some experience and recognition among their people. We see the youth went to the best schools and received proper training, which is all good, because this is what helped them earn the respect and the trust in the community, and this was for sure a sign of progress. There are still many of the old class of root doctors and patent medicine quacks with a lucrative trade among Negroes. Those were the ones who tried to heal everything with herbs and mysterious ingredients. Here, take this potion and it'll get rid of every ache in your body, right? There were still many of those old school type of doctors in the community. There are 3 Negro dentists, 2 being graduated from first-class institutions and enjoying good practice, which is very impressive. On the whole, the professional class of Negroes is creditable to the race. The teachers and physicians would bear comparison with any race. The ranks of the clergy are overcrowded and they present all degrees, from excellent and well-trained spiritual guides to blatant demagogues. The lawyers have little chance to show themselves. So overall, Negroes were largely stuck in these low-skill, low-paying jobs. And this was due to a lack of skill and also due to race. But the ones of them that found themselves in the professional class were the real deal, and they could compete with anyone from any other group. And then obviously the religious jobs were overcrowded, and those were filled with a wide range of people with different agendas, right? So this here was an overview on the jobs that Negroes had in Philadelphia in the 1890s. And hopefully you have picked something up from this and it has been informative. And from here, we're going to stop and we're going to pick up in the next commentary. And so I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.